My name is Lena Hart. I'm 42, and I've worked as a safety protocols officer at a high security defense manufacturing facility for nearly 20 years. You could say I know this place like the back of my hand. Every system, every protocol, and every inch of the plant. So when I was in the middle of reviewing the safety compliance ledger, looking for potential gaps in the data, I wasn't expecting any surprises. That is, until I was interrupted. It started with the whir of a drone hovering over my desk. I glanced up, blinking at the little device that had appeared like a ghost in the air. From behind the drone's camera, a polished voice broke through the silence of my office. "Lena Hart?" it asked. I rubbed my eyes and pushed my glasses up on the bridge of my nose. "That's me," I said, already feeling irritated. This wasn't how I like to conduct inspections. "Excellent," the voice said smoothly. "I'm Ethan Vale, the new efficiency strategist sent from HQ to modernize your department." I could practically hear the smirk in his voice. The drone shifted slightly, as if waiting for me to acknowledge the genius behind the corporate speak. The whole thing felt absurd. Who needed efficiency strategies when the systems we had worked perfectly for years? He continued, his voice dripping with corporate jargon. "We're here to modernize compliance and workflow synergy, streamline safety audits, and eliminate legacy overheads." He paused, and I could almost feel him lock eyes with me through that camera. "I'll be working closely with the senior team to, well, ensure that outdated roles are transitioned." Outdated. Legacy overhead. It didn't take much to understand who he was targeting. Me. I leaned back in my chair, refusing to let him see how much the word stung. I had been doing this job for almost 2 decades, and suddenly I was overhead. The voice from the drone didn't skip a beat. "So, Lena, I'll need to review your safety compliance ledger and operational systems in depth. Let's start with a few updates, shall we?" I bit my lip, keeping my composure. If he thought he could come in here and pull the rug out from under me, he was mistaken. The thing about Ethan Vale was that he had the polished confidence of someone who was used to getting what he wanted. But there was something else, something I could see in the way he spoke about eliminating the legacy systems. It was clear he had no real understanding of how critical those systems were, but that was fine. I wasn't about to let him take me down that easily. I didn't need to say anything right now. I had my own ways of making sure my systems would outlast him. As Ethan continued talking, I quietly opened a file on my computer and saved a backup of the safety compliance ledger, naming it under a fake label. It wasn't just a precaution, it was a plan. I would play the long game. Ethan wrapped up his introduction with a bright, "I'm looking forward to working with everyone here." His voice had a little too much enthusiasm, and I had a feeling it was only for show. As he signed off and the drone clicked off, I couldn't help but think, good luck, Ethan. He had no idea who he was messing with. I sat back in my chair, staring at the screen, already thinking ahead. I had decades of experience, a rock-solid reputation, and a system that ran like clockwork. Ethan might think he could just waltz in and tear it all down, but he would learn soon enough that I was the one holding the keys to everything around here. And if he wanted to make me obsolete, well, I had something else in mind. By midweek, I had already started to notice the patterns Ethan was weaving through the plant. At first, it was small, almost imperceptible things. The way he walked around the facility with his hands clasped behind his back, his gaze coldly sweeping over everything as if everything had to be improved. His gaze lingered the longest on me. On Wednesday, Ethan paid a visit to the team working in the operations department. As usual, his drone floated above him, recording every word he said as he addressed a few of the junior staff members. His voice was confident, almost condescending, laced with corporate buzzwords that had become his favorite tool. "Why are we still using these paper sign-offs for manual safety checks?" he asked, looking at one of the younger employees. "They're practically analog relics in a digital world. Don't you think we should be moving past that?" The young woman, unsure but eager to impress, nodded enthusiastically. Ethan's smirk grew as he looked around the room. "And don't get me started on the outdated protocols. We have to modernize the entire operation if we want to stay competitive." His eyes flicked toward me, and for the briefest moment I felt the weight of his gaze like a target. It was subtle, the way he singled me out without saying anything directly. But it was enough. Enough to make the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. It was like he knew exactly what he was doing. I stood in the doorway, watching as the others in the room fawned over him. The younger employees, starstruck by his corporate jargon, nodded eagerly, impressed by his eloquence, while I stood silent, knowing what was coming. Later that day, an email pinged in my inbox. one that made my stomach twist. The subject line read, New Policy, Reapplication for All Positions. I clicked it open with a slow, controlled breath, the words blurring into a haze as I read on. Effective immediately, all employees are required to reapply for their existing roles. This professional refresh will allow management to assess current personnel alignment with the evolving needs of the department. Please submit your updated qualifications by the end of the week. Your roles are not guaranteed. I felt my pulse quicken. Professional refresh? That was corporate speak for we're phasing you out. As I scrolled through the email, I saw my position marked under a list of eligible for reassignment. The words stung more than I cared to admit. By now, I was done pretending. Ethan's plans were becoming clearer, more malicious. He had come in here with his shiny suits and perfect hair, pretending to care about improving things. But what he really wanted was to tear down everything in his path and replace it with something faster, cheaper, and most importantly, easier to control. The next day, the reapplication process began, and Ethan conducted the one-on-one sessions with each of us, offering his usual glossy smile as he asked us to justify our roles. When it was my turn, I entered his office with calm determination. The moment I sat down, I knew this wasn't going to be a normal conversation. Lena, he began, his voice dripping with condescension, I've reviewed your position here, and it seems you've been holding on to responsibilities that no longer align with the company's future needs. I fought the urge to smile. It wasn't surprising. It was exactly what I expected. He pulled up a digital chart on his tablet. You're part of the legacy overhead, he said, his tone making it sound like a slight. He turned the tablet to show me a list of my tasks with a large portion of them marked as transitional. You understand what this means, don't you? These roles are being restructured. He said it like he was offering me a prize. I stared at the screen, pretending to process the information. I could feel his smugness radiating from across the desk, but I wasn't about to let him see how much I already knew. Instead, I smiled. Of course, Ethan, I understand, I said, my voice steady, betraying nothing of the storm swirling inside me. I've been around long enough to know that these things happen. For a moment, he looked almost pleased. Good, he said. You're on the same page. But as I stood to leave his office, I couldn't help but think how mistaken he was. He thought he had me cornered, that his corporate fixes and cutting-edge ideas could erase everything I had built here. What he didn't know was that the entire system still ran under my name on federal safety certifications. Ethan might have had the shiny new job, but I had the power, and when the time came, he'd learn just how dangerous it was to underestimate me. The morning I found out my access had been revoked, it wasn't a meeting, a memo, or a casual conversation. It was just gone, like something had vanished into thin air. I sat at my desk, getting ready to pull up the secure dashboards I monitored for chemical safety compliance, when I was greeted with a surprise. Access denied. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, a frown pulling at my face. I tried again, expecting a glitch. And again, same result. Something didn't feel right. It wasn't a coincidence. They'd cut me off. I opened a few other windows, trying to access different systems I was responsible for. My custom safety protocols dashboard? Locked. The one I had spent years building from scratch? Gone. Without a warning. Without a word. I sat back, slowly exhaling, as a cold realization crept up on me. Ethan had orchestrated this. This was no accident. He knew exactly what he was doing. But here's the thing. As much as he thought he had the upper hand, as much as he thought he was eliminating the old guard, he hadn't considered one thing. Me. My work was embedded in the very foundation of this place. The systems I ran weren't just files or programs, they were certifications. Certifications that made this entire operation legally compliant with federal safety standards. And now that I didn't have access to them, neither would the company. I knew how to fight back. I had ways of protecting myself. I calmly stood from my desk and walked over to my filing cabinet. A sense of purpose settled over me as I pulled out a thick folder containing my employment contract. After skimming through the familiar terms, my eyes stopped on the clause that would give me the leverage I needed. If I were terminated, or if my role was eliminated, all federal safety certifications held under the company license would become void. I could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on me as I took my phone from my pocket and called a local attorney. I wasn't going to make a scene. Not yet. This wasn't about drama. It was about control. It was about making sure Ethan couldn't erase everything I had worked for. An hour later, I found myself at a strip mall law office. the paperwork being notarized in the most mundane setting possible. The attorney was polite, but entirely disinterested in the story behind the documents. As he stamped the final signature, I couldn't help but think how well the irony fit. The same people who thought they could replace me were about to watch everything they'd built crumble. Back at the office, I slipped back into my seat, still calm on the outside, but with a small, satisfied smile tugging at my lips. Ethan might have cut me off from the systems, but I still held all the cards. For now, I kept the facade up, smiling politely whenever Ethan or anyone else in the department crossed my path. I wasn't about to let him see my cards just yet. The company was blind to the cracks forming beneath its shiny exterior. And those cracks? I was the one who had created them, one file at a time. The storm was coming, and I was ready for it. The weekly momentum sync was supposed to be routine, a place for updates and briefings, a chance to get everyone on the same page for the week's priorities. But that Monday, I walked in already sensing something was different. Ethan was standing by the projector, his usual calm smirk plastered on his face. The room was quieter than usual, an odd tension hanging in the air. I could feel the eyes of my coworkers drifting toward me, but I didn't let it show. I wasn't nervous, not in the least. I sat at my usual spot at the table, the weight of my contract withdrawal still fresh in my mind. Everything I had done, everything I had planned, was about to come to fruition. But I didn't expect it to happen this soon. Ethan cleared his throat and hit the button on the projector. A digital chart appeared, something I had seen 100 times before. He went through the usual updates, safety audits, risk assessments, all the standard procedure talk. I zoned out for most of it, not really caring. I'd heard it all before. But then, at the tail end of the meeting, he said something that made my blood run cold. As part of the ongoing optimization efforts, Ethan started, his eyes briefly scanning the room, we've made some personnel decisions. The words barely registered at first until he looked directly at me. Lena Hart, he said, his voice barely above a murmur. We'll be terminating your role as Safety Protocols Officer, effective immediately. The room went silent. I could feel the weight of everyone's eyes on me. I didn't flinch. I didn't even blink. I just looked at him, maintaining my calm. Ethan gestured to the HR representative standing off to the side, who quietly slid a termination packet across the table toward me. The papers were pristine, cold, no severance, no recognition, just a form and a digital goodbye. I wasn't surprised. Ethan had been trying to eliminate me for days, even weeks, but there was a cold satisfaction in watching it unfold, in seeing him finally take the bait. I see, I said, my voice as calm as ever. I reached forward, signed the packet, and then handed it back to the HR rep. Do you mind printing a copy for me? I asked, as if I were simply requesting a copy of a memo. The HR representative, clearly uncomfortable, nodded without saying a word. As she printed my copy, I stood up, calmly collecting my things. I didn't make a scene. I didn't argue. I had already won. The room, however, was another matter. The employees, the ones who had been eagerly watching the drama unfold, were now staring at me. Some faces looked apologetic, others curious, but no one said a word. I walked out of the conference room, holding my printed copy of the termination packet with the same calm serenity that had taken over me. On the outside, I was composed, but inside, I was already 10 steps ahead. The storm had arrived, and it was too late for Ethan to stop it. When I reached the parking lot, I pulled out my phone. It was time. A few taps, and the deed was done. My certifications, the ones I had worked so hard for, the ones that the entire plant depended on, were now nullified. Chemical safety, materials handling, secure transport, all revoked. I didn't send it to anyone. I didn't need to. I just waited. Later that night, as I sat in my apartment, sipping on a glass of wine, I allowed myself a moment to smile. Ethan thought he had me cornered. He thought his shiny new systems would fix everything. But he didn't realize the power I still held. The one thing he could never replace. I was the license. And with it, I was going to bring this whole thing down. It was Tuesday morning when I received the first ripple of chaos. I had just finished my coffee and was scrolling through emails when I saw an alert pop up on my phone. A supply shipment had been blocked. At first, I thought it was some sort of mistake, maybe a mix-up in inventory or a minor glitch. But then I saw it, invalid handling licenses. My stomach tightened as I scrolled through more alerts. A dozen shipments flagged, all delayed due to missing or revoked safety certifications. I wasn't there to fix it. I had made sure of that. Instead, I sipped my coffee, feeling a twisted satisfaction in knowing Ethan was about to face the mess he had created. He had no idea what was coming for him. In the meantime, I was back at home, lounging on the couch in my sweatpants, eating leftover stew. I didn't need to be at work to watch it unravel. Everything was already set in motion. I had made sure to leave Lena's legacy, her systems, running in the background. Every time Ethan or anyone else tried to take a shortcut, the systems I built, the systems they now depended on, would silently block any unauthorized actions, alerting the regulators and ensuring the company stayed locked out of their own data. As I chewed on a bite of stew, I checked my email. There were a few blind copied threads from former coworkers. It seemed they were watching the chaos unfold too. One message caught my eye. "Have you seen this? What's going on with the shipments?" Another read, "I'm hearing from ops. The system's crashing. Did you have a hand in this?" I smiled to myself, reading through the emails while still watching the alerts trickle in. Meanwhile, back at the office, Ethan was scrambling. I could almost hear his frustration echoing through the walls of the facility as he tried to log into the National Safety Registry, attempting to brute force his way in. But no matter how many times he clicked, the system wouldn't let him in. Every time he tried, it blocked him, locking him out of the entire registry. At some point, Ethan must have realized what was happening because his emails started flying. "Why can't we access the registry? What the hell is going on with the shipments?" His frantic messages bounced through the company like ping pong balls. I felt a flicker of pride. Ethan was out of his depth. It was exactly as I'd planned. In one of the threads I received, I saw the desperation start to settle in among the younger analysts. One of them typed, "Lena was the only one with reauthorization authority. We can't make any changes without her." I read the message twice, savoring the moment. Ethan had no idea just how important my role was. And now without me, the entire company was paralyzed. It was like a snake eating its own tail. They couldn't move forward and they couldn't go back. I took another bite of stew, unbothered. The foundation beneath Ethan's shiny new facade was crumbling, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Back at the office, the panic began to set in. As the hours passed, the internal systems crashed one by one, cascading failures tripping up departments that had relied on the licenses I'd managed for years. The whole thing was unraveling faster than Ethan could attempt to plug the holes. I stayed home, watching from the sidelines as the wheels came off. Thursday morning came with an unexpected knock on the door. But it wasn't a delivery or a team meeting. No, it was something much more serious. The National Safety Commission had arrived for an unannounced inspection. I knew it was coming, but I also knew it would be impossible for Ethan and his team to get through it. I had made sure of that. Word of the inspection spread like wildfire through the plant. Ethan tried to keep his cool, but there was a panic in his eyes as he called his team together. They scrambled to try to get everything in order, attempting to access the safety compliance records that had kept the plant running. But every attempt to get into the National Registry was blocked, and I knew exactly why. Without me, no one had the necessary credentials to move forward. And the intern they'd assigned to take over my duties? Completely clueless. She didn't even understand the gravity of tracking Class 4 nuclear materials, mistakenly thinking it was just about organizing storage boxes. My systems were still in place, silently running in the background, ensuring nothing moved without the proper authorizations. Ethan was furious, his attempts to bypass the security measures futile. He began sending out desperate messages, trying to brute force his way into the restricted databases, but every time, his attempts were blocked and logged. Meanwhile, back at my apartment, I was having breakfast, leftovers from the night before. I flipped through my phone absently, checking emails. One message stood out. "Did you do this?" It was from Liz, someone in the documentation department. The panic in her message was palpable, and I had to suppress a small smirk. "Did you do this?" "No," I typed back. "You did. It was simple. The foundation was already set, and now it was all starting to crumble. The National Safety Commission had arrived, but there was no one left to handle the inspection. Ethan, who had pushed me out, now found himself trapped in his own game. Without a certified safety officer, the inspection could not legally proceed. The clock was ticking. I wasn't at the office to witness the chaos firsthand, but I could imagine it all. Ethan's face, pale with frustration, trying to smooth things over with the regulators, offering nothing but empty explanations, as the inspector stood in the doorway, demanding answers. I knew, however, that the situation wasn't going to be fixed easily. Without my certifications in place, the company couldn't move forward, And as they faced the full consequences of their actions, I would continue to sit back, sipping my stew, enjoying the fallout. By the time the phone calls and emails started flooding in, I had already turned off my work notifications. Let them scramble, I was free, and I had no intention of stepping in to fix their mess. Gregory Fells had been out of the office for a week. It was the kind of retreat where the CEO always returned, looking slightly tanned, relaxed, and, as usual, oblivious to the storm brewing at ground level. But by the time he stepped back into the facility, the damage was undeniable. The systems were frozen, contracts were breached, clients were furious. It didn't take long for Fells to call an emergency meeting, demanding answers from the operations team. Ethan stood at the front of the room, visibly sweating, his face flushed with a mix of panic and confusion. The last few days had been nothing short of chaos, but Fells had to know just how deep the hole they were in really was. Ethan tried to explain. The compliance systems were supposed to be streamlined, sir. We eliminated the outdated processes, moved everything into the cloud. It should have worked. Fells cut him off, his voice sharp. Ethan, stop. What exactly happened with Lena's certifications? The silence that followed was thick. Ethan shifted uncomfortably, trying to salvage his pride, but it was clear the realization had hit him. The one person who had kept the entire operation in line was now out, and he hadn't understood the full extent of her role. I made the call to eliminate her position, sir, Ethan admitted, his voice wavering. We thought her systems were outdated. We didn't realize how integral she was to the whole operation. Without her certifications, we can't access any of the safety records or handling licenses. Fells was livid, his jaw tightening as he tried to wrap his head around the disaster. You fired the one person who could have prevented this collapse? Ethan's shoulders slumped. I didn't think it would affect operations this much. Fells wasn't listening anymore. He turned to the rest of the leadership team, his frustration palpable. Where is Lena now? Can we get her back? That's when the legal team stepped in, handing Fells a series of documents. They were from Lena, and they were damning. The emails, printed out in front of him, detailed every move Lena had made, every step of the process where she had safeguarded the company's certifications, and more importantly, the clauses from her employment contract that allowed her to revoke the company's access to those certifications if she were terminated. Fells leaned back in his chair, disbelief written all over his face. She knew this would happen. The legal team nodded. It seems so. We've tried to reach out, but she hasn't responded. There's also a clause about consulting work. If she wanted, she could come back in a more senior capacity. It's not too late for us to salvage this. Fells slammed his hand down on the table. Get her back, whatever it takes. We'll offer her whatever she wants. Money, position, anything to undo this mess. Within hours, Lena's name was on the lips of everyone in the building. Fells, desperate to fix the unraveling situation, made an official offer, a consulting position, lucrative bonuses, and, as a last-ditch effort, an invitation to return and help stabilize the company. The message was sent to Lena with urgency. It wasn't just an email, it was a plea. And as soon as it was sent, Fells leaned back, watching his phone buzz with the inevitable response. It didn't come, not immediately. That night, after the dust had settled and the desperation began to set in, Lena's response arrived. It was simple, direct, and cut straight through the mounting panic. Thank you for your offer. However, I must decline. Please find attached the necessary documentation confirming that the collapse was entirely self-inflicted. Wishing you compliance and clarity moving forward. Fells stared at the screen, reading the words over and over, each one driving home the reality that Lena had orchestrated this entire downfall. Ethan, standing nearby, could only look on in disbelief. Lena had become a shadow of a memory to them. And yet her power, the one thing they had neglected, had been the very foundation keeping the company from imploding. Ethan, now exposed as the man responsible for the mess, found himself cornered. As Lena moved on, the company was left drowning in regulatory fines, angry clients, and a workforce that now saw the cracks in the shiny facade he had tried to build. It was too late. Lena was already gone, leaving only her impact behind. As for Ethan, well, the fall was just beginning. It had been weeks since I walked away from the wreckage. The emails, the phone calls, the desperation, all of it still lingered in the air like smoke from a fire that refused to die out. And yet, I hadn't lifted a finger to extinguish it. Not my problem anymore. The moment I joined the new company, everything changed. The fresh start I'd hoped for was more than just a new office. It was my comeback, but not just any comeback, one that would send a message to everyone who had ever doubted me. I sat at my new desk, sunlight pouring in from the large windows that overlooked the city. My coffee cup sat at the edge of the table, steam curling in the air as I took a slow sip. It was a simple pleasure, one I hadn't appreciated in a long time. But now, everything felt different. On my laptop, the news of my new role as Director of Compliance Strategy flashed across my screen. I had landed at the competitor who had been patiently waiting for me to leave the wreckage behind. But it wasn't just any role. The position came with a hefty bonus, and more importantly, a chance to bring a few of my old company's prized clients with me. I clicked Post on LinkedIn. The announcement was short, almost matter of fact, but devastating all the same. Thrilled to announce my new role as Director of Compliance Strategy at company name. Looking forward to the exciting challenges ahead, including working with our new partners, including 2 former clients of my previous employer. I let the post sit there for a moment, feeling the weight of it. The company I had left behind was still reeling. But now, they weren't just fighting for survival, they were losing the clients I had once helped them secure, clients who now recognized my value. I wasn't the only one who noticed. Within minutes, my phone buzzed with messages from former colleagues, those who had seen the collapse firsthand and knew the real story. Some expressed their congratulations, others their disbelief. All of them understood the weight of what was happening. And then I saw the internal updates from my old company. The dashboards were still flagged, the compliance issues were mounting, one after another. I had triggered a cascade effect when I revoked my certifications, and it had set in motion a perfect storm. Legal fines were piling up, holiday parties had been canceled, the morale in the office sinking further. As for Ethan, well, he had been demoted. I couldn't help but feel a small sense of satisfaction when I read that. The once shiny efficiency strategist had been reduced to a powerless role, a puppet in the system he had tried to dismantle. No farewell party for him either. Just a quiet transition. An empty desk like the one he'd left me to sit at. I didn't send any messages to him. There was nothing to say. The irony was enough. Watching him flounder, seeing the company he thought he could rebuild crumble beneath him, was more satisfying than any words I could muster. The real victory, though, came when I checked the list of new clients my company had just signed. 2 of my old employer's crown jewels. It was a cold, strategic play, but one I had seen coming from a mile away. I knew how valuable those contracts were, and now they were mine. I leaned back in my chair, savoring the moment. The world had turned, and I was finally on top. The company that had once discarded me had underestimated the one thing they couldn't replace, the foundation I had built. A small, sticky note on my desk caught my eye. It was simple, just one line. In case they ever forget, I was the license. I smiled, sipping my coffee again. I wasn't just Lena Hart, I was the force that held everything together. And now, I was building something stronger. For me, for my clients, for my future. And as for my old company, well, they were just a cautionary tale.